here with my lovely mother.
Hi, I'm Janette.
And I'm so excited for this episode. Today we're doing another deep dive into a ride. I haven't even told my mom what the ride is.
No, tell me what it is.
Brand new for you. So what ride do you think we're doing?
Oh, God, I don't know. You're excited about it? Are we doing Small World?
No, we're not doing It's a Small World. We already did It's a Small World.
Oh, did we? Amanda's got a better memory than I do. We've been doing this for over a year. Amanda's got a better memory than me.
Today we're deep diving into the Great Movie Ride. That was
the one we missed. Yes, I love the Great Movie Ride.
So, all right, let's start with the facade. So the Great Movie Ride was located. Also, I have all my links and everything in the description. I mainly used Wikipedia and Disney Fandom for this. So, all right, so the Great Movie Ride was located inside the recreation of the famous Hollywood landmark, the Grauman's Chinese Theater. The park's Chinese Theater is a full-scale replica of the original building, and Imagineers actually used the original 1927 blueprints of the actual Grauman's Chinese Theater when they were building the construction of our Chinese Theater in Hollywood Studio. At the time the attraction opened, the actual name in Hollywood, California, was Grauman's Chinese Theater, and later became Mann's Chinese Theater or Mann's Chinese Theater. However, the park's proper name for this version of the building is just the Chinese Theater. I guess they realized they're going to go through some name changes and branding. We're just going to do the Chinese Theater. And then from 2001 to 2015, the theater facade was obscured from view when looking from the park's entrance with the sorcerer's hat, since the Mickey sorcerer's hat was sitting right in front of it. And that was actually why they took the sorcerer's hat down, was so that you could see the view of the Chinese Theater. In my opinion, I really love the sorcerer's hat. I would have actually left the sorcerer's hat personally, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah,
anyway.
I love the sorcerer's hat. That was cool.
But all right, let's get into some history. So the history. So the Great Movie Ride was directly inspired by the creation of Disney's Hollywood Studios. In a Walt Disney Imagineering book, it was revealed that the Great Movie Ride was originally planned as the main attraction in a show business themed pavilion in Epcot, which was going to be called The Great Moments at the Movies. However, the newly assigned, so again, Michael Eisner and Marty Schuyler, who was the Walt Disney World, CEO and the Walt Disney World Imagineer at the time, they actually thought that this idea, again, the great moments at the movie, rather than making it a pavilion in Epcot, that they could make a whole park basically around the movie. So that they were the ones who were like, let's make this into a new theme park with this movie ride being the star attraction of the ride. So again, they expanded upon the idea and the ride was moved to what was Disney's MGM Studios, which is now just called Hollywood Studios. So I'm probably just going to call it Hollywood Studios because that is the current title of the park, but back then it was Disney MGM Studios. An early concept was supposed to be called The Great Moments at the Movies, presented by Sears, Roebuck & Co., the Walt Disney Company, and the retailer, which at the time Sears was the largest retailer in the world, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because they are no longer the largest retailer in the world. But they announced a 10-year joint marketing and licensing agreement on November 19th, 1987, and that Sears would sponsor the park's signature attraction, again, the Hollywood Showcase store and this ride. However, all of these plans were scrapped before the park's opening, so it never even came to be. And instead, Coca-Cola stepped in to be the attraction's main sponsor, and then they retitled it The Great Movie Ride to reflect that it was a ride and not a movie, because again, they're kind of calling it a movie before, so they want people to know it's a ride.
Right.
The Great Movie Ride
before, but that's just a space filler.
Yeah, so even though the ride's in the famous movie theater, it's going to be a ride, not sitting and watching a film, which I think makes sense, especially back then when people didn't know what the ride was going to be. So I kind of would love to know the drama of what happened with Sears and why they backed out. Maybe they already started losing money. They were no longer the largest retailer of the world. But the queue, so the queue of the ride, the line went through, again, the recreation of the Chinese Theater lobby, and they had a lot of glass cases displaying actual costumes and props and various set pieces from actual films. And they also had digital posters too of movie films.
Of the movies,
so that, so you could see some digital posters too. So they kind of basically, they could just have more posters in the queue. The line then took guests into a small pre-show theater where Turner Classic Films host Robert Osborne provided insight and commentary about various motion pictures and film genres. And this was including things like musicals, adventure films, science fiction films, westerns, romance,
going all the way back,
films, kind of leading into the types of films you're going to see in the ride itself. The queue line ended at a pair of these automatic doors at the front of the theater that would lead into a 1930s era Hollywood soundstage where guests would then load into the waiting vehicles. And the attraction used the likeness of numerous living and deceased actors to be recreated as audio animatronics. Now, there were two conflicting voices of who played John Wayne in the ride. So I'm going to do what Wikipedia said, and it said that it was Chad Everett provided the voice for John Wayne's character. Again, I'm not sure. Again, there's a couple people who said that was John Wayne's voice, so that's what Wikipedia says is Chad Everett. So for Gene Kelly as Don Lockwood, they actually just used archival recording. Same thing with Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins, archival recording. They had Lizzie Minnelli as Dorothy Gale, because they had Liza Minnelli as Dorothy Gale, because they had new sound, so to speak. Dick Van Dyke as Bert, they also used archival recording. They had Bill Farmer as the Cowardly Lion, because again, they had new words, so to speak, that he was saying. opening.
So they didn't have to re-record all that. They just
No, they used a lot of archival recording, yeah. Humphrey Bogart as Rick Blaine, archival recording, and then Robert Osborne was himself, of course. So, all right, so there were two main things that changed within the ride in itself. We're going to go through like the actual ride, kind of like the attractions that you see, but for some things in the history that changed. The first was the Footlight Parade. So this was the first sequence of the ride when you got on and you went through. Apparently the Footlight Parade was plagued with so many problems from an engineering standpoint and so many technical problems. So when you saw it at its final stage, I would say like before the ride closed, it was basically just the women in their dresses, you know, in their little cape dancers on the diving boards and the little cake tiered thing behind a scrim sort of.
Right.
And they didn't move. They just had like lights that were going around. There was bubbles that would kind of remain and, you know, the Art Deco style. Apparently way back when, this used to move. Like this was a full moving structure and the women on it were also moving as well on this as well. They kind of did like a little dance apparently. Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, so they said for the first year, the cake rotated and was adorned with water jets as seen in the film. So it was full on water and moving. And then allegedly the rotating cake mechanism was always breaking down. They always had to close the ride to do repairs on it.
Oh, so that's
in addition,
why they just stopped.
Yeah, the water pumps were always failing. And they said too that the water pumps kept flooding the ride path. So park operations was just like, we have to take away the water features because it's literally flooding the ride path, which is destroying the ride vehicles. And so they decided to take it all away. And that's why when we saw it, and like, you know, before it closed, of course, it just didn't move at all.
Which was nice, just even, especially that I used to see, like the old movies I used to watch with my parents and stuff. I remembered some of those scenes.
Which I just thought was funny because, again, it's like I would have never known that there was water features in that cake tournament way back when.
Who remembered that, right.
So also in the Wizard of Oz scene, the Wizard of Oz scene didn't have any major structural challenges, but the Wicked Witch, so when you saw her in it, she changed. So essentially they had a version of her. They said it was an A100 Wicked Witch audio animatronic character, and then they basically upgraded that, you know, audio animatronic character to be more...
It also had something to do with the poof of smoke or something. There was something going on, I remember.
Yeah, it said that the original one just had very limited animation and that its designs weren't, like, it wasn't very lifelike, whereas like, the newer one was more lifelike and she could move a lot more quicker, essentially, and that's what they said. So, all right, so unlike many of the other Disney dark rides that have... So this was unique for the ride at the time. But again, so unlike all the other Disney rides where you would get on and off the ride at the same spot, this one technically had two loading and unloading area, as well as at the time most rides would always exit out into a gift store, or this is one of the first rides that does not exit into a gift store. You just basically leave, essentially. And now they do have a little cart right outside of the exit with like the little, you know, the things that you can purchase for the ride, but again, not into like an actual gift store, which most rides do empty into a gift store, which I thought was interesting. I thought I would point out. On the park's opening day, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Minnie Mouse, Goofy, and Roger Rabbit, as well as some other Disney characters, placed their signatures, footprints, and handprints in front of the facade of the Great Movie Ride. There is a very long list of actors and fictional characters who have their handprints and their signatures outside, and they were all real as well, I would note.
Right.
So I'm not going to go through the list because it was like 100 people. So I'm not going to go through the list of everyone who has it, but it is cool if you are a big movie person to walk around and see who does have their handprints and their signatures there.
It's like being at the real Chinese theater.
Yeah, like my fiance Ted thought it was so cool to see that because there's a few famous people that he had seen that was just like, wow, that's like actually their signature. I'm like, yeah, they came here to Disney to do this. And there was like photos of everyone who's done it too that's in Disney World, which is really cool. Again, as well as like fictional characters like C-3PO and R2-D2 from Star Wars also have it there, which is very cute to see. You know, it's like we're really believing in the magic here. So I really like that. All right, in 2014, as part of an exclusive programming deal with Disney, Turner Classic Movies agreed to become the sponsor of the attraction. Again, before Coca-Cola was the sponsor. The attraction underwent a refurbishment in 2015, and they added a new pre-show and post-show as well with Robert Osborne, who still did the narration of the ride. And the changes were unveiled on May 29th, 2015. And then on July 15th, 2017, it was announced that the Great Movie Ride would be permanently closed in order to make room for its replacement, which is Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. They believe that the attraction was becoming a bit more outdated. The audio animatronics were starting to become outdated. They were also starting to age, and the upkeep of them apparently was becoming a bit too much, as well as Disney was kind of changing Hollywood Studios' theme as well from more of the show business side of Hollywood to more of just like the movies themselves. So kind of like breaking away from, you know, the two sides of Hollywood of like show business versus movies. And so the last rides were given at 9:30 p.m. on August 13th. And in the traditional Disney way, by the next morning, all the signs were completely gone. And disappeared. And there was a photo opportunity for Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway right by the front as well. Now, I thought this was really funny when I read that by the next morning, everything was just gone, because that reminded me of when Pleasure Island closed in Disney Springs. And it literally was like they had the final New Year's Eve night, and the next morning it was like all gone. Like it was as if it never existed.
Dismantled.
It's like
into the black hole.
Yeah, when Disney is ready to start the next project, it is gone.
It is done. Yes. I wish they would have Mickey and Minnie, like we always said that we think it should be a Magic Kingdom. So
Yeah,
I wish
I've
they
always
would have
said
built
that.
Mickey and Minnie's Railway over like by Toontown or something in Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, that's what I was
and
saying,
I wish
in
they
a
would have
perfect world.
updated the movie ride to be more relevant. Like when they're saying it was getting, I understand it was supposed to be the golden era of Hollywood, but there are other movies that they could have changed it to give
Yeah.
people a new sense of going through.
Well, this gets into our next segment, which is fun, which is the licensing deals of these movies.
Okay.
And I imagine that's part of the reason probably why Disney also wanted to close this attraction. Because if you think about it now in Hollywood studios, at least, all of the movies are Disney movies. So they no
Yes.
longer have to license the rights of these movies.
to the other movies.
Whereas in the Great Movie Ride, most of these movies were not Disney movies. So they all
okay.
had to be
that
licensed.
answers my question.
Yeah.
Well, my wish.
So Disney arranged separate licensing deals with various studios to represent all of these different characters and films and settings and attractions in the ride. So think about how many licensing deals he would have had to have. Most of the non-Disney films were represented in the Great Movie Ride were produced or owned by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer when the
Yeah,
ride's
MGM,
operations began way back when. MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, again, who also opened with Disney as well. In 1985, Disney and MGM entered into a licensing contract that gave Disney worldwide rights to use the MGM name and logo for what would become Disney MGM Studios, which again is now Hollywood Studios, while separate contracts were used for The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Singing in the Rain, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, The Public Enemy, Tarzan and His Mate, and The Footlight Parade. So all of these, again, had representation in it, but they all had their own separate licensing deals. Disney's license for the aforementioned films continued with Turner Entertainment until the attraction's closure. So when MGM closed, it became Turner Entertainment. And again, they still had all these licensing deals with Turner Entertainment. The Great Movie Ride also had Alien, as you remember. Alien was actually owned by 20th Century Fox, and Disney originally acquired the licensing rights to this film for a completely different attraction, which was ultimately completely canceled. And so they were like, well, we still have the rights, so let's put it in this one. I would love to know what that ride was going to be with Alien. So curious.
I know. Could you imagine?
So in addition to the 20th Century Fox, scenes from almost all of the major film studios were presented in a film montage with one notable exception. There were no movies ever in the Great Movie Ride or in that film kind of at the end that were released by Universal Pictures. And this was because Universal was their main competitor in Orlando.
Oh, wow, okay.
With the Universal Orlando
That's
Resort.
my favorite part. That was my favorite part of the ride, the end.
Yeah, the only exception was Shakespeare in Love, which was produced by Miramax and distributed by Universal internationally. So that was featured, but that was the only one because it wasn't technically produced by Universal. So I thought that was funny. It's like, yeah, I would also be petty too. So
Right. Why put the competition in?
But I thought the licensing deals was interesting because I think that is part of the reason why they chose to close the ride.
Instead of doing all that, they just decided.
Yeah, because I agree too. I think Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway should have been like the way it is in Disneyland. They have a full Toontown. So I realized they closed Toontown in Magic Kingdom for New Fantasyland. But I would recreate Toontown in Magic Kingdom and put this ride
that
into
there,
Toontown,
right.
which is where it is in Disneyland. And it makes much more sense conceptually for the ride and for the theming of the ride.
Right.
However, I also realized too that Disney is probably like, I'm sure they're probably spending thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, honestly, in these licensing deals, and that they probably didn't want to spend anymore. And I'm sure the upkeep of the ride was becoming too much in order to keep it.
And they had the space and the to do it, so that's why it went.
Yeah, so I get in a way that they wanted to turn the park into a full Disney park rather than like, again, the movies park of what initially opened with. But I don't know, I'm still sad because I still think it's great to have those. I don't know, I thought it was great to see it.
I miss that.
Especially when I was a kid. Like, I've never seen a Western, I don't like Western films, for instance, but it's cool to see like the John Wayne Western films or those gangster
or the
films
gangster
as a kid.
movies or the
Yeah.
Singing in the Rain.
Because like those are classic films I think is good to know, like from a cultural perspective, that I think if you're not exposed to it, you may never hear of it. So even
I
though
was
they
all
are
exposed to it
famous.
when I was a kid, so because of my parents.
Yeah.
You, at the other hand, they were not on TV. They were not things.
Yeah, because things had moved. So
Yeah.
it's like a historical piece
Right.
that I think was really great to have. But again, understanding
miss
is
it.
why it closed, but I miss it as well. But bringing the ride elsewhere, that's why I call this segments. Plans called for the Great Movie Ride to be the main attraction for Disney MGM Studios Europe theme park, which was scrapped due to early financial difficulties of the Euro Disneyland Resort. So again, TBT to that when they opened up Euro, what do they call it? Euro Disneyland, I think it's just what it was called. And now it's called Disneyland Paris, of course. And then they have Walt Disney Studios, which they have just recently renamed to Disney Adventure Park, which I think is so funny, honestly. But I do think it's funny because Walt Disney Studios, now Disney Adventure Park, is basically a Hollywood Studios copy to a certain extent. It has a lot of the same things as Hollywood Studios. So it would have been cool if they did do the Great Movie Ride in that park.
In that park. It would
But
be a
they
big
didn't.
draw, right?
Yeah. So years later, when the resort began turning profits, Disneyland Paris, that is, a show business themed was in development, which is Walt Disney Studios Park, and that opened in 2002. But again, they didn't do the Great Movie Ride still, again, I think due to costs, it was the main thing. So 3 separate attempts were made by Walt Disney Engineering to bring the Great Movie Ride to California. First, plans were incorporated into an attraction called the Disney MGM Studio Backlot, which is a project that spanned over 40 acres that would have all the actual film studio themed retail and entertainment district. But again, it was eventually never built, and they eventually did, that was planned for downtown Burbank in the late 1980s, but again was never eventually built. So this would have actually not technically been part of the park. It would have been in a separate part of California, but it would have still been like similar enough, I would say. Several years later, plans called for the ride to serve as a centerpiece of a proposed Hollywood land at Disneyland, which would have been added to the park during the planned Disney decade in the 1990s. But again, due to budget cuts, Hollywood Land was canceled and was literally never created either. And then later, plans were called for the ride to be built as part of the Hollywood Pictures backlot area of Disney California Adventure Park and Disneyland Resort. Again, budget cuts, and they just ended up never doing it essentially. So yeah, so many budget cuts in Disneyland. They never got the Great Movie Ride, and now I would assume they probably never will since it's closed in Hollywood Studios. All right, let's get into the ride experience now. So let's pretend we're going on the ride, right? So there are a lot of ride-throughs on YouTube of this ride. The ride is about 20 minutes long, so if you want to watch a ride-through of it, it's on YouTube for 20 minutes. There's lots of people if you just look it up. All right, so you enter through the queue, you enter into this 1930s era Hollywood soundstage, and you're loaded in by cast members. It's very similar to that of the Universe of Energy attraction that was at Epcot, the same ride mechanism type. However, the ride vehicles were much smaller in comparison. So really, you were kind of only grouped in like 2 to 4, whereas in the Universal of Energy, it was like 10 people could be in your row. It was gigantic. Right. So there are also 2 ride vehicles that were always listed, depending upon the time of day of how busy the ride was. They would either have the 1A ride vehicle and then the 2B ride vehicle, and they would experience different attractions, essentially like different shows sort of throughout the thing. So we'll kind of go over those 2, but just keep in mind there's 1A and 2B is what they're called. So the film set within the soundstage features, again, they had the large neon theater marquee. They had the whole thing of like the Hollywood Hills, like the Hollywood sign and everything that was there. So you're really stepping into the movies. And as the ride begins, the song Hooray for Hollywood would play overhead as the vehicle's tour guide, an actual cast member, like a real person, would be welcoming the guests. And they also introduced Osborne, who is kind of the narration. That's not they kind of had both the narrated part and the actual tour guide person as well. And so they sort of have both, and they say they're going to take you through the different classic films throughout history. So the first genre of films introduced are the musicals, which begins with The Cake of Starlets by a Waterfall, which was from Busby Berkeley's Footlight Parade, which we had talked about, that used to spin with water, and now it just was standstill and didn't move at all. So the next musical scene was the audio animatronic figures of Don Lockwood, who is Gene Kelly, swinging from a lamppost from Singing in the Rain, followed by Mary Poppins, who is Julie Andrews, and Bert Dick Van Dyke singing on rooftops of London from Mary Poppins. I can actually see this right now, actually.
I know, we just see it as we're
I remember
through.
it, yeah. The next scene is a tribute to the gangster films. The ride vehicle would pass through a dark and seedy back streets of the 1930s Chicago and pass an audio animatronic of Tom Powers, who is James Cagney, and is seen from The Public Enemy. When both pairs of ride vehicles, again, got 1A, 1B, so 1A would continue to the next show past a green traffic light above like a tunnel entrance, like they would actually go into a separate room, whereas the 2B would stop because they would get the little red light. And so and then they would get basically two different gangster scenes essentially in the 2 separate rooms. I didn't even realize that when
I was on the ride. Okay.
It's funny because I do remember this in the way that I remember the red light. Like I remember like sometimes there would be no red light and we just continue to the next room, where sometimes the tour guide person would be like, oh, the red light, we're not going to run a red light, so we're going to stay here. And then you would have like the little gangster shootout,
Wow,
type
that's
thing.
interesting. I didn't even notice that. Okay.
So they both have the same scene. They're just in 2 separate rooms.
Two separate rooms.
So while you're stopped, a live gangster named Mugsby and their audio animatronic companions, Squid and Beans, would show up and get involved in a shootout with a rival mobsters. So Brains, Legs, and Weasel were their names. In the car on the opposite side of the street where the ride vehicle is stopped. And during the shootout, the live gangster would chase the tour guide away and they would hijack the ride vehicle. So I feel like, I can't remember if that was 1A or 1B. So whichever one of that was 1A or 1B, because in the next scene is the tribute to the Western genre. And basically, if you didn't have the gangster scene of that scene, you would have like the Western scene instead, where your tour guide would get kidnapped away.
Okay, all right. So I never even noticed that.
So here the guests would encounter audio animatronics of The Man with No Crime, which was Clint Eastwood, standing outside of a saloon, and Ethan Edwards, who was John Wayne, sitting on top his horse. A sign on the building facade reads, Ransom Stoddard, Attorney at Law, James Stewart is what it said. And the 2B ride vehicle, which was already being driven by the gangster, would continue past the shootout. And again, then the 1A person, they would have the shootout with the 1 hour shootout would be again by your tour guide, they would stop at the town bank while a bank robbery is in progress. So again, so Tubi had the gangster scene when now they got hijacked.
So I've been on both of those, I know.
Yes, we have.
So we've just been on them at different times. Okay.
Yes, and now 1A, they're getting the Western scene of the bank robbery, and then then they get caught up in the bank robbery, and then there's the bank robber, either Kate Durango if it was a female, or Kit Carson if it was a boy robbing the bank who appeared inside the bank. Then a whole shootout happened. They're chasing the tour guide around, and then the bandit, like the bank robber, they would hijack the ride vehicle to get away,
right?
And then they would set the town ablaze with dynamite. So again, and so now going forward, all the scenes will now be the same for 1A and 2B as well. So again, but one is hijacked by a gangster and one is hijacked by the Western
Didn't
scene.
even notice that. Okay.
All right, so next the ride vehicle continues into a darkened corridor of seemingly abandoned spaceship, revealing itself to be Nostromo, which is the vessel from Alien. So when I was a kid, this used to scare me so much. I used to have to close my eyes.
It still scared me, even when I was an adult. I put my head down.
Yeah, I closed my eyes every single time. This used to scare me a lot when I was a child.
I didn't look at the alien.
So the ride vehicle passes an audio animatronic of Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, holding a flamethrower as she prepares to confront a creature lurking within the ship. Guests could also hear Jones, Ripley's pet cat, meowing in the darkness, which I thought was really funny. I don't really remember the cat meowing in the darkness.
I'm too busy being scared.
Yeah, as well as Nostromo's mother computer of an imminent ship self-destruction countdown. And hearing this, the gangster or the bandit would become nervous and they would speed the ride vehicle through, but not before the alien would appear from the ceiling, kind of like scaring you as like a jump scare.
Looking like he was coming down.
Yeah, and for many, many years, I had no idea what the alien looked like. It wasn't until I was much older, I finally looked at it and I was like, oh, it's actually not that scary. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. Truly, your imagination can really run wild.
Yes, I just still kept my head down.
So next, the ride vehicles would enter into the scene into ancient Egyptian tombs filled with snakes. So Osborne, again, the narration of the ride itself, would inform the guests that they are in a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark as audio animatronic figures of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, and Sala John Rhys-Davies struggle to lift the Ark of the Covenant. A second room within the temple features a large altar in the form of the ancient Egyptian god Anubis, and near the top of the altar there would be a priceless jewel in which that was watched over by a cloaked temple guard. And the gangster or the bandit would see the jewel, they would stop the ride vehicle, they would try to get the jewel, they would be warned, don't touch the jewel or whatever. They would ignore the warning, grab the jewel, and then, there'd be a huge puff of smoke, and then your tour guide essentially would just return to you and be like, oh my gosh, that's right, the magic of the movies, right?
Right.
And so, and when the smoke cleared, you see the skeletal corpse of either the gangster or the bandit revealed,
to the wall,
as they touched the thing. So it was always very fun. I don't know, everyone always loved that. The next film genre was the horror films, as the ride went through an ancient burial chamber full of mummies, some of which have come to life. They kind of just like moved a little bit. The scene was actually very short, all things considered.
Yeah, it was short.
The ride vehicle then would depart the tomb and go into a dense jungle, and this is where you'd hear the audio animatronic of Tarzan by Johnny Weissmuller swinging on a vine, and you see Jane sitting on top of Timba the elephant, and also Cheetah the chimpanzee can also be seen there too. And Jane was voiced by Maureen O'Sullivan, or it looks like Maureen O'Sullivan, the actress. The ride vehicle then moves past the final scene from Casablanca, featuring audio animatronics of Rick Blaine, Humphrey Bogart, and Isla Lund, Ingrid Bergman, as they stand in front of a waiting airplane. It's funny because I've never actually seen Casablanca. I've always tried to watch it. It's like hard to find sometimes to watch it.
Good classic movie.
But it turns out, not to like give spoilers, but yeah, they don't end up together in the end. Like they leave. Yeah,
she leaves him. He tells her she has to go.
Yeah, and then they don't end up. I didn't know that.
He gives her up.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't know that that's what that scene
was. She wants
depicting.
to stay, and he tells her, no, you have to go. You have to be with him. You have to go do what you have to do.
So I didn't know that until I was an adult. I thought that was crazy because it's like, I know this is a famous movie, but I just
classic love story.
Yeah, I gotta watch Casablanca for sure. I think I would love it. All right, so next, the ride vehicle passes a film projection of Mickey Mouse in his role as the Sorcerer's Apprentice from the 1940 Walt Disney animated film, Fantasia. Yes. And then we enter into Munchkin Land, the scene from The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy's house has landed on the Wicked Witch of the East. And when both 1A and 2B are in use right now, they kind of stop in the middle of the scene, but it's only 1A who will interact kind of with the witch. The audio animatronic munchkins will kind of just, they pop out of honestly nowhere and they just start singing to you. Then there's the big plume of smoke, and the audio animatronic of the Wicked Witch of the West, who's Margaret Hamilton, appears and asks who is responsible for killing the Wicked Witch of the East. And the 1A tour guide would say, they basically have their little interaction and, be like, oh, that must have been so fun for the cast member to be like,
have interaction with the witch.
Before a house drops on you too, or whatever.
Right.
And then the munchkins would reappear from the hiding places, and they would sing again as you go through the Yellow Brick Road. And then you would go through Munchkin Land and past more audio animatronic figures of Dorothy, Judy Garland, the Scarecrow, Ray Bolger, Tin Man, Chuck Haley, Cowardly Lion, Bert Lahr, and Toto Terry, which is so funny
Right.
that they had that in
Going up
Wikipedia.
the
That
yellow-
Toto's real name was Terry.
Right, going up the yellow
Yep.
brick road.
Yeah, standing in front of Emerald City on the Yellow Brick Road into the ride's grand finale. And for the grand finale, you basically enter into a dark theater where you would, like, the ride vehicles would basically line up in front of a large movie screen, and Osborne or the tour guide would conclude the tour with a 3-minute film montage of classic film moments.
That's my
And
favorite part.
In this montage, I was going to read out all of the films, but there are 173
It just goes so fast.
Yeah,
it's just so
170
fast, and it
films.
just flips, and your mind is like, as it's going, it's like a game. Like, oh, that movie, that movie, that movie, that movie.
Yeah, so 173 films
Yes.
were in this montage, none from Universal, which I think is so funny.
Yes.
But yeah, and that was how the ride
Classics,
ended.
all classic shots.
And then you
Yes.
just come through the end, and then you
Yes.
just disembark. So yeah, but that was the Great Movie Ride. So I just have I have 2 fun facts here. The first is that there are 3 references in Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway that pay tribute to the Great Movie Ride. The first is a poster that says the Great Movie Ride can be found in the carnival scene between Horace's popcorn stand and Donald's hot dog stand. In the tornado scene, there is a mailbox with the iconic "No Place Like Home" quote. And prior to the factory scene, there's an alley cat sound effect that can be heard in the back alley, which was the same sound effect that was also used in the Great Movie Ride as
Oh,
well.
wow, okay.
I think that one
Pay
I don't think
attention
anyone would know.
next time.
But-
Okay.
And then the other little fun fact I have here is in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Disney was interested in purchasing Jim Henson's The Muppets. Walt Disney Imagineering developed a Muppet-themed land for Disney MGM Studios called Muppet Studios, and the land was to have 2 main attractions. One was going to be Muppet Vision 3D, and the other was the Great Muppet Movie Ride, which is going to be a parody of the Great Movie Ride featuring all of the Muppet characters, such as Kermit, Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Gonzo, everyone reenacting the famous film scenes.
Oh, wow.
And they're going to do different films. They weren't going to do all the same ones, but they
Right.
said films such as Frankenstein and Peter Pan. However, Jim Henson unfortunately died in the process of all of this happening. The Muppet Vision 3D was actually the last project that Jim Henson worked on before he passed away, and so the entire deal essentially just fell apart
through.
at the end, except for they still had the Muppet themed area. It was just cut back drastically, and they only kept Muppet Vision 3D since it was like low key already
That
filmed.
would have been a
for the most
cool,
part.
cute little ride.
It really was. It's a shame that he died so young as well. So yeah, but I thought that would have been like kind of fun to have like a parody Muppet ride. So, but yeah, so all right, that was our deep dive kind of into the history of the Great Movie Ride. So lots of fun stuff in here. Again, so sad that the ride closed. So still sad to this day. I wish that the ride
Yes,
did not
I miss
close.
it.
I do miss it. I do
mean,
think about it honestly.
Amanda
whenever we're
loves
there.
the Minnie and Mickey's Railway. I think it's
I
a
do.
cute ride.
I
I'm not
do,
as
yeah.
enthralled with it as she is, but I do miss the movie ride because for me especially, as much as you liked it, I liked it because it was nostalgia for me.
No, I agree.
Just
yeah.
seeing the old, singing. I watched Singing in the Rain when I was a kid over and over and over.
Oh, yeah, I
again.
love Singing in the
and
Rain.
I've
That's one
seen
of the ones I have
Casablanca.
seen.
I even, like I said, even the 1930s girls on the bubble things. My mother and father used to put those old movies on when they used to be on the TV and stuff. So I saw all that. And then when you get to the end, all those movies that to me was like just the nostalgia of seeing all the clips of them was enough to bring them all back. I just love that ride.
No, I definitely agree. And I think it's interesting when I was reading in this how, again, they were changing the overall theme of the park itself from like the making of the movies
Yeah,
to the
I've not been
movies
so happy with the
themselves.
overall change because I'm not a Star Wars fan.
Well, what I'm saying though, if you think about it too, we had the Great Movie Ride. We had like lights, camera, action was how they do the car stunts.
Right.
We had the backlot tour, which was actually tours of film sets.
Right.
Again, there used to be a lot of stuff that was like that, which I think is
Yeah, that
interesting.
had to do with the actual movie making.
Yeah, which I think is interesting that they decided to pivot to just the movies themselves. I'm sure it's much more cost effective, and they can
Yes.
again, if they focus just on Disney themed items, again, the licensing agreements are a lot less
easier,
overall.
right.
So I mean, like we do still have the Indiana Jones show, which technically is still like the making of movies. So I feel
Right.
like that's one of the last things that's left at this point.
Yeah.
That is like the making of the movies is the Indiana
I do
Jones
miss
show.
that. I miss that part of the park.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I did like that a lot. So
That's why MGM's is not my favorite park now. If somebody said to me, you can knock out one park,
Yeah.
that would be the park I would
I feel
knock
like
out.
I feel like Hollywood Studios is very siloed now because I feel like either they need to commit to doing lands, kind of like how Epic Universe has the 4 distinct lands that you enter into those lands.
Yes.
Because I feel like right now the park is very disjointed because you still have the Hollywood Boulevard and the Sunset Boulevard, then you have a full Toy Story land, a full Galaxy's Edge land, and then you sort of have this area where you do have the Backlot Eatery and you do have like the Star Tours. Oh, Star Tours technically is a backstage thing too, technically.
Right.
And Indiana Jones, like I feel like the park is still in the making. happening, so to speak. And then you have that corner where there's like nothing going on. You have that Star Wars show in that theater, which is a cool show, but kind of isn't that interesting. And then we still have the empty Little Mermaid theater as well, which they are doing. They are upgrading that show, and it will be back eventually. But yeah, again, I mean, like that's kind of empty as well. And then the Frozen sing along is also over there too. So.
Which I think they had to do because they put so much into Star Wars that when you've got kids who are not Star Wars.
I disagree. I think there's Star Wars is only one part.
Toy Story Land.
Yeah, the Star Wars is only one. I mean, like we just went through all the sections. Yeah. That's only one section of the park if you think about it. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Is I think it's just a very disjointed park at the moment, and I'd be curious to see what their overarching plans are for the park going forward as they're trying to turn the park into something else as they're moving away from one into the other. So, but yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, like there's a lot in the park that other than Star Wars.
I think once they open up the Mermaid, that's a big attraction. That was always a big attraction.
It was, yeah, it was a good show.
So that'll take a lot of the bulk away from some of the other ones where they're so overpopulated to stand online and the queues get so long. It will give people something else to do in between.
Well, I think it's also more for like the kids to do as well. That's like more, I would say, like more Disney friendly in that sense. So it's like, again, a lot of kids want to see the Disney characters. Right. It's like that's partially why you go into the parks.
That's why they go.
That's why Disney has the Disney characters.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a big chunk of bring them to that.
Sure. All right, this is where we normally go into a little bit of Disney news, but this is a very pre-recorded episode because this week I am actually on my bachelorette right now in Disney World. Actually, the day this comes out, I will be embarking on the Disney Wish.
So it's going on a cruise.
Yeah, I have not publicized this on my Disney Instagram that much just because I don't really know how to say it, especially too for a cruise. Cruise sailings are very specific when you're on the cruise, so it's like you don't want to publicize too much when you're going to be on the cruise just for safety purposes. But yeah, but by the time this comes out, I'm already going to be on the cruise at this point. So I'm on the cruise already, and this past weekend I actually would have spent 2 days in Disney World as well with all of my friends, which is really fun. So that's why this is very pre-recorded for us. But we do have some Disney birthdays. First up on May 21st is Antonio Madrigal from Encanto. On May 25th is Goofy's birthday, so happy birthday to Goofy. On May 23rd is my friend Quincy's birthday, so happy birthday Quincy. And then also on May 25th, who shares a birthday with Goofy? Do you know who shares a birthday with Goofy? It's my cat Morocco. So
it's Morocco's birthday.
Yeah, I remember that from last year that my cat shares a birthday with Goofy, which I think is so funny because she's definitely not Goofy. She's more like grumpy.
No, yes.
More like attitude. She's not even grumpy. She has more attitude than grumpy. Attitude.
Yeah, I wouldn't call her grumpy. She does have an attitude. We're trying to think about what character she could be, but she has an attitude.
I know. But again, the day that Disney comes out with the Torty cat and whatever things, we're buying all our merchandise because there's nothing for Torties there. And they do, there is one Calico cat, right? So I forget which one's a Calico cat. But we need more Torty representation in our lives. So, but happy birthday to everyone, especially to my little kitty. She will be 6 years old this year.
6 years old.
And Morocco is named after the Moroccan Pavilion in Epcot. So that's where she got her name.
Definitely went fast.
For sure. And then this is where we usually have our Disney memory. Do you have a Disney? I feel like we shared a lot of our Disney memories.
I shared a lot. Like I said, my memories. I've just been about my memories. That movie ride was my memories.
No, I agree. I love the Great Movie Ride so much. It was so great. That's why I want to do a whole podcast episode on the Great Movie Ride because I think it's one of the best. I also kind of picked it, not really perfectly, but Hollywood Studios did open on, where I have it here. Hollywood Studios opened on May 1st. And so, I mean, like at this point, that was like a month ago. As of recording, May 1st is only in like a week. So for us, it's like opening kind of soonish.
Just opened, yeah.
But it's still May, it's still kind of like the fun Hollywood Studios, I would say month or something like that. It's still birthday month for Hollywood Studios. So I definitely wanted to do this. Funny enough, I actually had a whole different podcast planned for this week's podcast. And I decided not to do it. So that's why I still want to do a Hollywood Studios themed episode. But originally I was actually midway through prepping a completely different ride. And then I realized it was a Magic Kingdom ride. And last week's episode was Magic Kingdom. So I was like, wait, I don't want to do two Magic Kingdoms back to back. So I pivoted. I did the Great Movie Ride all in one day and prepped this episode instead. But yeah, we'll get that other ride. That other ride was Space Mountain. So next up probably will be Space Mountain for a ride deep dive. Okay. But thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Make sure you give us a review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. This is the first episode for our YouTube channel that's coming out on the day. So we have fully caught up. So for the last 3 months, 3 to 4 months, I have been posting every single day from all of our archival episodes. So now we are fully caught up. So now every week the YouTube episodes will come up the same week as our regular episodes, which is really great to see. So make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel so you can, watch on YouTube and leave comments there as well. And let us know what you thought of the Great Movie Ride. Do you remember the Great Movie Ride? Do you like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway more? Do you wish that both could exist in the same world? That's what I really want, is both to exist in the same world. And low-key, I wouldn't have even updated it. I would have kept the outdated animatronics, the outdated movies. To go through it. I would have just kept it because I think it's still historical.
I'm saying because they thought it was outdated, they could have updated it a little bit. Yeah. But yes, I would have have been very happy to just keep
Yeah,
on
I would have
going.
loved to just keep it. I thought it was so great.
Now I
want to
go. I would have liked to have gone through and seen 1A and 1B.
Well, perhaps we'll find a YouTube channel.
I
that
probably
have
noticed at certain times that we went through and they didn't do the thing, and in my mind, I said in my head probably,
Yeah.
they didn't do the fight. Like they didn't do the fight. And then just in my mind, figuring, okay, today's the day they're having a problem with the fight, so they just made us go through.
No, either you get the West,
Yes.
the Wild West, or you get the gangster scenes.
Yes,
So
I
one or
did
the
know
other.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did know that as a kid, but I never registered it.
It didn't register. I just figured they
So-
were having problems with one or the other.
I
and
could
it
always
didn't-
just tell that we either saw one or the other was the
Yes.
thing, but I never registered that there were two options.
There were two
I didn't think
options,
about
right?
it,
So now I learned something new. I love when
Yeah.
I learn something new.
Yeah, even after like years after the ride closed,
Yes.
which is funny. So, but we'll definitely maybe watch a YouTube video of the ride again, because it'd be fun to see. Also, I wish I would have seen the woman on the cake stand, like knowing that would have moved with water animatronics.
Oh, what
and
it
stuff.
was, yeah.
Yeah, because that would have been really cool.
Yeah, I
if
only
that
remember
could have
just being
worked.
behind that film, just like
As I'm
kinda
saying, we only saw it
standing there.
non-moving, nothing, just like the lights going around with the bubbles. But again, kind of funny to hear about that as well. But anyway, thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Our next few episodes are going to be real fun. We're going to have the Lilo and Stitch movie review, which
Oh,
will be
that's right.
great.
We got to see Lilo and Stitch.
My mom
That's the next
will
one.
have gone to Italy, and she's going to recap her
I'm gonna
entire
recap
Italy
my trip. Okay.
I'm going to recap my bachelorette as well as a full Disney
Oh, God, we
Wish
have so much-
cruise
yeah,
review.
so much next ones will be,
Then Elio is coming out, the movie
Yes, we
review
gotta
for
see
Elio.
that.
So again, lots
be
of
busy.
lots of good episodes. Again, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're following the podcast. But until then, we'll see you again soon.